What the Liberals are proposing is to impose massive fines on car makers who don't sell enough electric vehicles. Fortunately, those car makers that don't produce currently any zero-emission vehicles will have to leave the Canadian market entirely or pay a $20,000 tax for every non-EV car they sell.
Speaker, no fear-mongering and misinformation in that speech, I can tell you.
The Liberal plan to ban the internal combustion engine is an act of pure economic vandalism. When this Soviet-style car sales mandate is combined with Trump's auto tariffs, it'll mean the death of the domestic car manufacturing. This is government-assisted suicide for the Canadian automobile industry. If this horrific Liberal policy is allowed to proceed, the damage it would unleash will spread out far beyond the auto industry. This regressive policy will hurt over lower-income Canadians, students, and refugees. This idiotic policy discriminates against rural Canadians and remote First Nations. This proudly socialist policy will push up electricity prices while paving over paradise to put up a solar farm. Over the last 10 years of Liberal rule, we've seen some overtly communist or Marxist policies. For example, the Liberal plan to search the homes of 2.3 million Canadians for firearms that look scary to people who know nothing about hunting. Or their plan to ban plastic food packaging so Canadians will eat less fresh food, fruits, and vegetables, while being forced to eat food packed with preservatives. But this car ban struts around wearing a Che Guevara shirt. It was one thing when we had a prime minister who made dumb statements such as the budget will balance itself, or that he doesn't think about monetary policy. Yet despite replacing the drama teacher with an economist, we still have a government committed to this economic lunacy. Just so Canadians understand, what the Liberals are proposing is to impose massive fines on car makers who don't sell enough electric vehicles, EVs. Obviously, car makers can't go around forcing people to buy their electric vehicles, especially if they do not currently manufacture the electric vehicles. So how will car makers ensure they have enough EVs, they sell enough EVs? They'll do it by drastically raising the prices of internal combustion vehicles. When prices go up, demand goes down. Unfortunately, those car makers that don't produce currently any zero-emission vehicles will have to leave the Canadian market entirely or pay a $20,000 tax for every non-EV car they sell. The result will be much higher prices, less competition, and fewer choices for consumers. The only winners with this policy are the all-electric car makers such as Tesla and BYD. That might be great for the United States and China, but it leaves Canada more reliant on two countries that don't always have our best interests at heart. The Parliamentary Budget Officer recently reported that the price of EVs would have to come down by 30% in order for the mandate to work. Since that's not likely to happen with 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, the only choice will be to increase the price of internal combustion vehicles by 30%. This is effectively a $20,000 car tax. This would price millions of Canadians out of the new car market. Those millions of Canadians will then turn to the used car market. The price of used cars will go up. Canadians who could just afford a new car will be forced to buy used. Canadians who could just afford to buy a used car will be forced to take on more debt or go without a vehicle entirely. That may be an option if you can afford to rent or own a home in a major city with public transit. For those living outside a major city, such as the 108,000 people living in my riding, they'll have no options. That means they can't work. Maybe this government plans to give those vacant jobs to laid-off auto workers. By hiking prices on new vehicles, demand goes down, which means production must go down. Fewer cars being sold means fewer people working in the industry. That means fewer auto plant workers, fewer car part workers, fewer car salesmen. Those laid off will cut back on spending, leading to fewer jobs in service industries. Those who can still manage to afford a vehicle will have less money to spend after paying the higher prices. None of this is a surprise to government. All of this is spelled out in the regulations. Quote, zero-emission vehicles, ZVs, are expected to generally cost more than non-ZVs, and this vehicle price increase could lead to a reduction in the quantity of vehicles purchased, end quote. By their own estimate, this policy will cost Canadians an extra $54 billion. Leaving Canadians poorer than before really is the hallmark of this Liberal government. Lower income Canadians won't be able to afford a car, but they'll still be forced to pay taxes to subsidize an EV or BMW for Canadians who can well afford it. Mr. Speaker, this policy clearly discriminates against rural and remote Canadians. Pricing millions of Canadians out of the car buying market, the government will have a devastating impact on rural communities. Without access to affordable transportation to get to work or to medical appointments, these Canadians will be forced to leave their homes and move to the cities. Even those rural Canadians fortunate enough to be able to afford an EV may find themselves trapped when the temperatures drop. Despite claims repeated by the Liberal ministers, Canada is not Norway. I had the opportunity to travel to northern Norway to observe the Canadian Armed Forces participate in NATO exercises. Norway's capital, Oslo, sits just a few degrees below the Arctic Circle. They're a Winter Olympic superpower, but they are also a coastal country with a milder climate than Canada. Ottawa, in January, is 10 degrees Celsius colder than Oslo. Canada is also 26 times bigger. And once you start driving north up the Trans-Canada Highway, things get a lot colder. In minus 25 degrees, the range of an electric vehicle drops by half. That might not matter much in a big city when the commute to work and back is 40 kilometers, but in rural communities in Canada, the closest hospital can easily be beyond the range of an electric car. We haven't even touched the reliability of the electric grid in rural and remote parts of Canada. We've seen during ice storms that cities regain power much faster than remote areas. Going without electricity for 3 weeks is unimaginable for people who live in major cities. Living in rural Canada, it's just a reality. Whether it's an ice storm or solar storm or a cyber attack, for rural Canadians forced to buy electric vehicles, the result is the same. Once the EV battery depletes, they're trapped. They can't drive to the grocery store. The EV ambulances can't get to them if they're sick or hurt. The EV fire trucks can't put out the fires. Without electricity, people will die. This Liberal policy clearly discriminates against those of us who live in rural and remote communities. This tired, old Liberal government loves to deny the reality they reveal in their regulations. They'll look you straight in the face and tell you they're making life more affordable. They can literally quote their own regulations back to them, and they still won't believe themselves. This policy will make cars unaffordable for millions. But the plan doesn't stop there. Ontario's electricity power operator found that to meet net zero goal using only renewables would require an area 400 times the size of Toronto. How many trees must die to make the Liberals' dream a reality? This Liberal government recently committed to reclaiming 30% of Canada's developed lands. This is a government at war with itself. Has their proud socialist minister finally abandoned his opposition to nuclear power? When the minister declared an end to road building, was it a preview of a carless Canada? Forcing an early adoption of EVs before we have the electric infrastructure ready will mean higher energy prices. And it's not just about building more EV chargers. Every local transformer in every community in Canada will need to be replaced. Electro Federation Canada estimates the cost at $350 billion, and these costs will be passed along to consumers. Energy poverty will increase. Thanks to the leadership of Pierre Poilievre, Canadians have been liberated from the carbon tax. Thanks to the Liberal Party, all those gains will be lost due to higher electricity prices. Canadians will pay more for electricity and they'll pay more for cars. And rural Canadians who can't afford cars will be forced to move to the cities. Our domestic and auto industry will disappear. Canadians will be forced to pay higher taxes to subsidize battery makers and $60,000 cars. This policy will leave all Canadians worse off.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. No fear-mongering and misinformation in that speech, I can tell you. You know, it's interesting in terms of how it is the Conservatives, and no one does it better, well, possibly Pierre Poilievre, than the member opposite, Madam Speaker. All one needs to do is just listen to her speech or read the speech. I can assure the member that gas-driven vehicles are not going to disappear in the next 10 years. That, in fact, even in the question before, it's, you know, a hybrid. Her colleague that spoke before, you know, I make reference to the Ford 150 truck, which actually is gas-driven and has electric component to it, Madam Speaker. So it's the best of both worlds in that sense. And I'm wondering if she could just provide some sort of an explanation as to why Pierre Poilievre and members of her caucus spread misinformation continuously in an attempt to put fear in the minds of Canadians.
Member from Algonquin, Renfrew, Pembroke.
Madam Speaker, even hybrid electric cars won't qualify. And if there are still electric or internal combustion vehicles on the roads or owned by people, they won't be able to get the fuel because the new fuel standards are eliminating the gasoline that will be able to fuel the ICE cars, internal combustion engines. So even if we can't afford an EV and all we have is a gas-powered, the gas won't be available.
Industry. So my question to my colleague is as follows. She's going after EVs. So what ideas does she have for the automotive industry?
Pembroke.
Madam Speaker, with respect to the EVs as well as the internal combustion engines, the tariffs that have been imposed on us and the tariffs imposed by this government are making new cars unaffordable altogether. So even anything that's left in terms of auto parts manufacturing in Canada is going to be driven out of the country. There are even fewer EV manufacturers, so Canadians aren't going to have anything to drive in the next 10 years.
The Liberal government has several times, or the Liberal members have several times today indicated that they're not banning gasoline vehicles. Well, while that may be partially true, what they are banning is the production of new gasoline vehicles in 2035 and introducing a strictly 100% electric vehicle mandate. Wondering whether my colleague could provide a little bit more clarification on that.
Honourable Member for Algonquin, Renfrew, Pembroke.
Okay, so what the car sales people have to do is reach the mandates that are required by government. And if they don't reach the sales limits required on electric vehicles, it means that they will have to pay a $20,000 fine. A $20,000 fine on every gas-powered vehicle as opposed to electric vehicle. All that being said, at least where I live, there may be a few electric vehicles in the lots, but nobody wants them because they can't use them where they live. The coal just makes them unusable, and the time it takes to charge, if they can even charge them at their home, because as was mentioned before, many homes don't have the amperage needed in order to charge their cars. Even the military base, they won't be able to accommodate people who are living on base because they certainly don't have the infrastructure for what they need, let alone EVs.